Welcome back to the Warehouse Podcast, everyone. My name is Elijah. I'm here today. We're going to chat about, of course, the Baltimore Orioles. It's what we do every day. But in particular, the Orioles pitching. Over the month of June, it was exceedingly good. I don't think it was on anyone's bingo card necessarily. I don't think it was that certainly not the expectation of what the strength of this team would be, but my God, it's actually been really good recently. To kind of illustrate this point, I want to take you to the leaderboard for, I'm on Fangraphs, of course, it's always F4. Um, but the leaderboard for team pitching WAR over this year, and you'll see the Orioles placed firmly in 26th place with a total of 4 WAR accrued over 3 months. Um, that is not good. It's there are teams with more than 3 times the WAR, the total accrued value that the Orioles pitching staff has put up. You never want to be that far behind, putting it quite simply. All that said, in the month of June, your baby birds were sixth, and they put up 3.6 F4. And yes, to be very, very clear, they have 4 on the season, and 3.6 of those 4 came in the last month. So over the first 2 months, we were averaging zero point 0.2 F4 per month. Just like abysmal. That's not even necessarily good for a single player. Um, yeah, I mean, like the entire pitching staff coming up with, I guess, zero point 0.2 in a single month. It's a 6 month season. The entire pitching staff combining for 1.2 WAR would be just tragic. Um, Let's see if any team is below that right now. Yeah, the Athletics are still above that as a team, and they are the worst in the bigs. That was our pace for the entire season over the first 2 months. So happening in Baltimore, to say the least. And I don't think that coming into this season, for those of you watching on YouTube, I'm sorry about all the ads popping up. You know how this is. These companies need to make money, but all these like odd videos popping up in and out. Anyway, I digress. The names that you would expect to be putting this value up coming into this season certainly would not have been, like Trevor Rogers, Dean Kramer, and good old Charlie Morton, who led the way with a full win above replacement in the month of June alone across 5 starts. Um, to kind of put that in perspective across 5 starts, if you are putting up 1 WAR, you're averaging zero point 0.2 WAR per start, and you think a player has 30 starts in a season. At 30 starts times zero point 0.2 would be a 5 WAR season, which is like all-star level performance. Everything kind of backs it up. 288 FIP, 180, or I'm sorry, 288 ERA, 185 FIP, 308 XFIP. He was striking out 11 and a half per nine, walking less than three. Man, I hate the per nine stats. I apologize. Let's see what Charlie Morton was doing here. Charlie Morton was striking out 28.8% and walking 7.2%, walking below the league average and striking out almost 38%, or I'm sorry, almost 30%, 28% as a pitcher. Wildly impressive stuff from Charlie. And yeah, I just wanted to talk about them and give them some flowers today. The three of them together have been very pleasant surprises. Cade Povich also had a solid month. He is just so up and down that I don't know, maybe he deserves his own episode at some point to kind of talk about what makes him effective in some starts and so wildly not effective in others. But yeah, I mean, I think that there are 3 guys to talk about here. Dean and Charlie Morton are the top 2 most valuable pitchers on this team over the past month. And then Povich and Trevor Rogers were both in contention, but Trevor Rogers is the new hotness. So I figured Trevor Rogers would be the guy to talk about. Redemption for the Kyle Stowers and Connor Norby trade is very much here, and it is unfolding in front of our eyes. So let's get into a little bit. Trevor Rogers, wanted to start with him. It's very, very simple. Like for those of you following along on YouTube, as always, I've got trusty old baseball savant up in front of me. But just looking at movement profiles, there really is nothing distinct about like what he has done this year. We haven't really tweaked anything on the large scale. I think the only thing you could potentially point at is maybe like killed a little bit of vert on the sinker. I think it's like literally negligible. The thing that did change, however, is very, very simply his velocity. His four seamer last year averaged 91.9 miles an hour, under 92. This year it is at 93.5. If you go up and you look at, just like percentile rankings, you'll see that 93.5 is in the 35th percentile. That's a tiny bit misleading. Left-handers throw slower, very, very simply. I didn't realize quite how significant this difference was, but shout out Rates and Barrels, Eno Saris, Derek Van Riper, uh, Trevor May, Jed Lowry, whoever else is on the third seat there. But their podcast was chatting the other day, and they mentioned that average four seam velocity is, or I guess average fastball velocity is kind of splitting more significantly than you'd expect it to. Right-handers are kind of optimizing velocity more effectively and are kind of outpacing lefties currently. And that's to the tune of, I think right-handers were like 94.7 miles an hour on average, but left-handers were 93.1. Um, for all the Baltimore folks, I remember that was the country station when I was growing up, WPOC. But yeah, 93.1 miles an hour is average for a lefty. And so for a left-handed starting pitcher, Trevor Rogers actually has very slightly above average velocity. This fastball has kind of, like it has jumped from below average velocity to like firmly in the realm of average and even slightly above. Um, and now there are a couple other things about Rogers that I think really, push this fastball to play up a tiny bit more. One of them is the extension, which interestingly enough, he has cut back this year. He is not throwing quite as far out as he used to. But he still gets above average extension. Obviously, the dude is 6'5". He's a big guy. He has a low slot and he, releases out front. So I think he's got a low slot, he's got this extension, and he gets a lot of arm side run on all of his pitches. Dude is obviously a pronator. He's the kind of guy who just lets it ride, and that kind of like the lefty tail, it's just the lefty tail on all of his pitches, and then the slider is just about removing as much of that as you can. Um, to back up a little bit, I think you can say that there's a little bit of a change in pitch usage. Um, oh my gosh. Every time I'm, clicking through Baseball Savant Live, I get a little bit lost, so bear with me. Um, yeah, so change in pitch usage, like from when he was most effective that big rookie season, he was throwing 57.7% four seam fastballs. The average fastball he had back then was significantly harder. To be clear, 94.5. I think it was 94.7 in 2022. So he did have more velocity back then, and he was almost a 60% four seam guy. Over time, that has tapered away because his fastball was getting destroyed. You go ahead and you look at last year, had an ex-WOBA of 355 against the four-seam fastball. Hitters were slugging 463 against it. Average exit velocity of 92 miles an hour. Just, like not good results on the four-seam fastball. He gradually got away from it, got away from it, until he was almost like a true four-pitch pitcher. Last year in 2024, as he was trying to find himself with this low velocity, obviously 2024 was a low point for him, but as he was trying to find himself, he threw the four seam 31.7% of the time, sinker 24, changeup 23, slider 20. So, he was throwing all of these pitches almost evenly. And finally this year, we have a bit more of a spread again. He is like letting the four seam eat. We saw it against the Rangers in this most recent start. A great start, by the way, did a really good job, but I remember Adolis Garcia and man, whoever was hitting after him. I remember that he got into a little bit of trouble, I think, in the second inning or it was in the first inning, and then Adolis Garcia came up in the four hole, and then somebody right after him, and he threw 7 out of 8 fastballs for 2 strikeouts, or 7 out of 8 pitches, 4 fastballs for 2 strikeouts. Obviously, we know uh, those of us who watched the game know that this was a clear plan against Adolis Garcia. We ended up throwing him 20 straight fastballs, the 20th of which sailed over the fence to tie the game in the bottom of the 10th inning. But I digress. Despite that being a clear plan against this one individual hitter, it was also a plan for Rogers to go ahead and establish this fastball. He did so. Like the fastball was eating, and the results on it this year so far have been really pretty good. He's running almost a 30% whiff rate, 28.6%. Hitters are hitting just 188 off of it, slugging just 281. The expected results say it should be playing about average right now by WOBA, which, you know, average is fine. Um, I think that we don't expect him to be Clayton Kershaw, who's going for 3,000 strikeouts tonight. We don't expect him to be some dominant force. If the four seam fastball, which is considered the worst pitch across all of baseball, a necessary pitch, but the worst pitch, if that is yielding a 300 WOBA expected, that is right on average. That is totally fine. You will take that and you will let the other pitches play off of it, and you will do damage with those other pitches, so to speak. Um, so yeah, the four seam usage has bumped up, and again, that is entirely the result of him throwing the ball harder. We have seen, like not really a significant jump in movement profile, in horizontal or vertical direction. He really is kind of the same guy, except he throws harder. And that is really all it takes sometimes. There's a reason these teams are chasing velocities. There's a reason that this is the thing to do. You can make more mistakes when you throw hard. Um, One thing I will note a little bit, I do think that he has gone ahead, and as the slider and sinker have come down a little bit in usage, and the four seam has gone up. The changeup has gotten a slight bump relative to last year. He really is like predominantly relying on that to be the pitch that mixes up timings. Um, and yeah, I mean the changeup has returned really great results as well. Xwoba is actually 261, so significantly lower. Um, Hitters hitting 136 off of it, slugging under 200, slugging under the Mendoza line. You really, really love to see it. Changeup looks wildly effective. Um, and yeah, he's got the slider just kind of as a change of pace, so people can't lean all too much. He's using the slider right now at about 15% of the time, so one in every 6 pitches or so, 6 or 7 pitches is going to be that slider. Um, and that's like that's really all you need to keep people honest to an extent, for a right-handed hitter, just so they can't be constantly leaning out over the plate. That four seam inside the slider will keep them honest. The left-handed hitters, just so they aren't like opening up and yanking to the pull side, doing the same thing, keeping them honest, making them protect the outside third. So I think what we're seeing in Trevor Rogers is, as has been reported, like plentifully. Yeah, that works. What we're seeing is that he really he is healthier this year. I think that's the biggest thing. He had said as he was struggling with these back problems, as he was doing this, he was afraid to really lift heavy in the off season and prepare his body the way that he needed to. So he clearly did that. He has talked about how good of a plan the Orioles had to kind of get him back to fighting shape. And we are seeing results here. I think you have to be encouraged by this. His slider, which, by stuff is, I think, maybe the worst pitch he has. It's a little bit of a gyro, tiny bit of two plane, but really largely is just a change of pace and a like keep hitters honest and make sure they don't only go to your arm side stuff. That's running a 37% whiff rate. He is getting swings and misses on that. He is getting really soft contact. Average contact against it is only at about 75 miles an hour. I will say that's on a total of five batted balls. So this is, some small sample caveats aside, but um, yeah, man, you really have to love what you're seeing from Trev. I think one thing I did want to note is like relative to the guy we saw last year, the four seam has had a 2 point bump in stuff plus. The sinker has actually had a 5 point drop, but the slider has had a 7 point jump. The changeup has had a 6 point jump. And I think part of those are, I've talked about in the past, like one of the components of these stuff models is kind of the delta to the fastball. So while the changeup is not actually moving anymore, it is like just it's about a mile an hour harder this year and is maintaining that same spread in the movement profile to that fastball. And I think that's really, really valuable. You're keeping that difference, but you're playing all of this up and shortening the amount of time that the hitter has to react to the changes that it's seeing. So Trevor Rogers has had a lot of really good success. Once again, he's got a 2.05 ERA right now in 22 innings. It's not striking out a ton of guys, but that's not who he is fundamentally. He is he's a finesse pitcher, he's a soft contact pitcher, and he's a not walk guys pitcher. Um, yeah, so striking out about 21%, slightly under league average, I believe, for starters. Walking 7% under league average. The 14% K minus walk is fine. He's inducing a lot of soft contact. Hitters are not getting a lot of hits. It's all been pretty good. Um, so super, super glad to see him on this team. Glad that he's getting a little bit of a redemption arc for himself. And man, I'm, even more glad that he's a free agent in 2027, not 2026. We get another year of this guy, and we will enjoy, a full season of him healthy. Potentially, he could even get back a little bit more velocity from what he had as a rookie and such, and get that much more effective. So, whew, all right. Next up, our boy Dino. Dean Kramer has really done a great job this month. I guess going to the old standard um, 3.30 ERA, 2.85 FIP across five starts. He's done a solid job. He has limited his walks a little bit more than he typically does. I think he's only walking two per nine. Um, I think the thing you have to point at here, and we have I know I personally on this podcast have talked about complaints with Dean Kramer's cutter, how it would just get left over the plate and get blasted. Well, in this past month, the Orioles have dropped his cutter usage down to about 14% from 24 the past month, 23 the month before that. About a 10% drop in cutter usage, mostly accompanied by a increase in split finger usage. 10.3% jump on that. The split finger is actually his most used pitch now. You could somewhat argue that this is like modern Arsenal construction, but he's got two fastballs that are the next two things. So he's going to be attacking you with a fastball more often still. Um, but, that's pretty significant that he's using the split finger almost 30% of the time. Curveball usage has also jumped up a tiny bit. Just about a 3% bump. I don't think that's too significant. It was actually slightly higher the first month of the season. Um, but he is really, really attacking with the split finger fastball. I think that there's, I, earlier on this year, I complained a little bit because the split finger was not doing what it was last year. He was not killing as much vert on it. It was getting hit very, very hard. The somewhat interesting thing, it is returning really good results right now. Um, 250 batting average, but only 286 slugging. It is pretty weak contact throughout. It's running a 46% whiff rate in the month of June. You are seeing really, really good results, but nothing is that different about the pitch, which is kind of fascinating to me. Uh, Let me jump over to like induce vertical break here. the first month of the season, it was inducing 8.5 inches, 10.2, and I was like, my God, this thing is floating too much. I want it to dive. I don't want it to be like inducing vertical break and actually hopping like a fastball because that kind of keeps it up. You want this thing to be tumbling, to be diving below the zone, and that's just not what we were getting. And sure enough, his split finger is kind of splitting the difference on those two, pun intended, splitting. uh, it's still at about 10 inches, and I don't entirely know what is making this thing more effective right now, besides to say there is a little bit less horizontal. That was another thing I had somewhat complained about was it was running a little bit too much, and it was almost, more on like more on a horizontal plane with the sinker than it was with the four seam fastball, his primary fastball. And I do think that in order to properly hide something in a tunnel, you need to somewhat link up the horizontal break. Uh, I've kind of gone through this before on this pod, so for the folks who have listened before, and this is repetitive, I do apologize. But a delta in side to side is much easier to perceive than something that is on the same line toward you and just slower or faster. I think the like side to side deltas are just much easier to perceive. I think that is why, if you're like going to throw a sweeper off of your fastball, you need to get a ton of break on it and, really, really change speeds as opposed to something smaller, so to speak. That's why there are very few just like fastball and slow cutter guys. Um, okay, so refocusing. So Dean has cut a little bit of horizontal movement. He's kind of trying to tuck that splitter back under the four seam fastball tunnel. It's still a little bit hoppy, but it clearly is working. I think the results on it have been really, really good this past month. Like I said, 46% whiff rate. He, and I think the fact that he is throwing it more, is almost I think it's working to his advantage because I think that it might make the fastballs a little bit more surprising, so to speak. The four seamer and the sinker are both still getting hit pretty hard. Um, the X wob on them are both 324 on the four seam, 354 on the sinker. But last month on the four seam, it was a 529 ex woba. So you are like seeing some improvements in the fastball performance. The sinker technically regressed a little bit, but we obviously in reducing that horizontal movement again, you are doing that to prefer the four seam fastball by reducing horizontal movement and tucking it in that tunnel as opposed to the sinker. So we do see some improvement in the four seam, some regression in the sinker. I think that's fine. But while you are throwing the four seam fastball more, that is the one you want to bias toward. And that's the one you want to be supporting and building the arsenal off of. So anyway, Dean Splitter looks really good. It still floats. I think he does need to get it down in the zone more. You see this heat map, and it's a little bit all over the place. If he is tucking that thing below the zone, he will have success. It really is that simple. But that said, it's been good. I think this is a good pitch mix for him. He's found something in this splitter. We saw it be wildly effective last year. So keep running with it. Don't argue with it, and we'll see what happens. Okay, so on to Mr. Morton. I think uh, I think this is the most interesting guy. Man, for those of you on YouTube, you just got a spoiler because I had a certain plot up that was supposed to come later. It didn't. Um, okay, so I need to digress right here. I kept it up on the side. Clayton Kershaw has officially struck out 3,000 Major League batters. That is pretty cool. I was keeping it up on the side while I was doing this, not watching too close. But man, what a special dude! What a talented arm. Okay, so Charlie Morton. Here we go. Charlie Morton was so bad at baseball for for a month and a half. And for the purposes of this podcast, I'm just going to focus on the first month because in May he did go ahead and had some relief appearances, and it kind of would have jacked up what I was trying to go ahead and really look at here. Um, I did a podcast earlier this year, uh, like after some of his early struggles, and I was kind of trying to understand what is going on with him. And the first thing that I cued in on was the four seam fastball has more vert. It is hoppier. He is throwing it at the top of the zone more often. And I kind of postulated that this was like a move by the Orioles to try to go ahead and just, like get a little bit more width out of this pitch, get it up in the zone, make it something that he could catch, swing, and miss on. And I think what happened is it might have just in a more vibey sense threw him off, targeting a new spot, doing all this. But I think what it did was it created more separation between the four seam and the curve. Um, so I think that hitters just more easily could spit on the curve. I talked about zone rates a little bit. He wasn't throwing the zone or wasn't throwing the curveball in the zone or out of the zone more or less often than he had in the past, really. Um, I do think there were some problems with curveball location. That was certainly true. It was not only in the zone but elevated. That makes it easier to hit, of course. That I do think that's true, but I think to an extent that yeah, there was a problem with the tunneling that he had had for so long. So I think that what's somewhat interesting here is over the last month, uh, Charlie Morton has gone ahead and actually uh, kind of reverted a little bit. He has killed a little bit of all my plots have stopped working. Okay, we're back. He's killed a little bit of vert and he's started making it a little bit more horizontal. I think that it is an interesting trend. The four seamer, man, I'm sorry. There we go. That's the plot we want. The four seamer this year started out at about 13 inches of induced vert. It is now down to 12. He's cut about an inch off of it, and he has gone ahead and made it just a little bit more horizontal, added an inch of horizontal. I think that that might be partially incidental. The thing that I noticed as I was scrolling through all of this is Charlie Morton's average arm angle has actually dropped. I'm trying. It's still going by pitch, so I'm trying to kind of play averages in my head. But I would say, average was probably 21 and a half, 22 degrees, and now we're looking at something on the order of 20, a 1 or 2 degree drop. And the interesting thing about that, it's also making his curveball a little bit more like sweepy. He is getting more action on the curveball. He's got an extra inch of horizontal movement. The vertical, however, has also gotten a little bit extra, an extra half inch relative to the beginning of the year. Um, but what's fascinating about this is like the traditional like create vert on a four seam seems to be being rebuked here to an extent. Um, the four seamer has had the physical results against it have been a little bit rough in this past month. A 304 batting average, 391 slugging, but the expected rates are much, much, much better. The expected batting average 125, expected slugging 189, expected WOBA 156 against the four seam. Hitters are not hitting it hard. Um, and that is a really significant improvement from the beginning of the year when slugging against it was 481, expected slugging 418. He has kept the whiff rates reasonably high. I think one thing that I did note was relative to 2024, th this four seam tweak did get the change it desired a little bit. They did get a little bit more whiff. Um, but the if you are able to mitigate hard contact against it and still keep the whiff rate somewhat high. It's only been about a 1.5% drop since that first month when I pointed that out. Is if you can do that and you are simultaneously keeping hitters off of the curveball just a little bit longer, that's going to be what really, makes you shine. And to kind of push on that, the curveball in the first month of the season, 333 batting average, 636 slugging, 397 expected WOBA. The batting average dropped from 333 to 271. Slugging percentage 636 dropped to 292 on the curveball. The xWOBA of 397 dropped to 256. Average exit velocity dropped 6.5 miles an hour, down to 86 miles an hour. So, like, results on his two primary pitches are so, so much better right now. And I do think they are all somewhat inspired by this arm angle change. I do think this was very largely a matter of tunneling. Excuse me. Yeah. So I think that Morton is kind of finding the natural tunnels again. I did go ahead and I was like, okay, where was his arm angle last year? And interestingly enough, it kind of walked all over the place. Early in the year, it started probably up at 22 and a half degrees or so. By August, it had tailed off down to about 19. And then in September, it jumped back up to 21 and a half. So, it kind of walked around, but I think we want to keep him in this about 20-degree range. This is certainly where he seemed most effective and where the tunnels, seem to be complementing each other best. I think that's the simplest thing. Um, I will note that Morton is still like giving up some hard contact. The changeup is still getting hit pretty hard. The cutter is getting blasted. Thankfully, he does not throw that often, as he should not. This Orioles fascination with cutters is just becoming a meme at this point. I just talked about Dean Kramer going ahead and scrapping his, maybe not fully scrapping, but a 10% reduction in usage this past month, and it being the most effective month of his career. Maybe not. I'm speaking in hyperbole. Maybe not the most effective month of his career. Certainly the most effective month of this season. Um, so Charlie Morton, last month threw it 6% of the time. It's if it stays there, sure, keep it, as a little change of pace, whatever. Um, but yeah, I don't know. Super, super promising from Morton. I think that, this drop in arm angle is uh is kind of what was needed from him. It is a like I hadn't necessarily attributed it to a higher arm angle originally, but we looked at last year when he was more effective, and everything was a bit more linear, or I guess side to side rather than up down. Um, so yeah, just an interesting note on Morton. I think that, uh, yeah, he's one of the like fascinating studies in how like pitchers are not a one size fits all. They are not a single box that you can, like create a pitcher is never as simple as, just get everybody to throw a high spin four seam fastball at the top of the zone. It's really not that simple. And it's so much more nuanced because what is effective for each pitcher is a fundamentally different thing. And that's what makes it so, so fun to, like try to dive in and look at what these guys are up to, what changes they are trying to make. Um, Yeah. So I guess the last things I wanted to show here, just like some movement comparisons from early in the year. Morton, he had about, uh, well, let me just go ahead and show locations here. I do think that this is an important note. His curveball locations were like, as I said, very, very all over the place. And over the past month, uh, with this, lower arm slot, he has more dialed in on the, low and into lefty quadrant, the glove side low quadrant of the zone, is hitting that much, much, much harder. And it was much more spread throughout the first month. So the curveball locations are certainly getting better. I think the fastball is worth looking at as well. Stand by as I pull it up. So yeah, first month of the season, he was very, very much the top of the zone. He, we talked about the whiff. We did talk about the number of just weak fly balls he was inducing there in that previous podcast. He definitely, you know, was having success in what he was trying to do, but the ones that would creep down into the zone were getting hit extremely hard. Now he's like a little bit more all over the place, but I think what is interesting is it is not so clearly geared toward the top of the zone, and it is very, very much more clearly geared toward the arm side. I think that there was just a general like top of the zone, middle is fine, but he has been running the pitch much, much more arm side throughout the month of June. I think that is also a little bit of a separation thing. That we talked about the curveball having an extra inch of break into a lefty away from a righty, and now the four seam fastball has an extra inch of break into a righty and away from a lefty. So you are creating that extra little bit of separation, forcing hitters to cover both sides of the plate. Um, and yeah, man, I mean, just great, great results from Morton. I do think it's worth pulling up his Fangraphs page real quick. I think the thing that I wanted to point out here, something I had mentioned in that previous podcast. Also, this is a little bit of a victory lap for me, but I'm not trying to toot my own horn. Um, Something I had mentioned about him was that this year, the stuff rating on his curveball actually dropped a little bit, and there was really nothing different about it. I think it was like a half mile an hour difference on it. There was nothing too significant as to why, like, there was nothing too significant in the like physical metrics of the pitch as to why it had a worse rating, not a bad one. You can see early in the season, all of these were still 5 to 15% better than league average on Stuff Plus. But I think that what is interesting about it, and I mentioned this with Rogers, but the delta to the fastball is a component of all of these stuff models. And so because the fastball actually got more hoppy, he created a little bit more separation for it and might have actually kind of gone out of the range where these stuff models prefer it. Over, I guess I can limit it to these starts in June. Uh, Stuff ratings on the curveball have been 120, 116, 133, 127, 126. You know, every single time out there, he's looking at a double plus pitch on this thing right now. Some of his outings in uh, during the month of May, he did really start getting it up there. He flashed a 140 on Stuff Plus one time. Um, but I do think the other interesting thing is his third start of the year, April 8th against Arizona, his four seam fastball flashed a 103 Stuff Plus. And, it was kind of in and out. That was very, very clearly the highest. But as he has been on this good run, it hasn't necessarily been all too impressive. 94, 75, 90, 90, 83. And so, like, again, this kind of just goes to illustrate like what makes an individual pitch good is not necessarily best for the arsenal as a coherent unit. So it does look like this four seam fastball, which, for the four seam, the difference to the primary fastball will not be a factor in how the models are evaluating this. So this four seam is being graded only on its pure characteristics, the like pure release point, spin, like vertical movement, horizontal movement, just the actual physical characteristics of this pitch. And it's kind of context neutral when you're looking at the primary fastball. I think that seeing that, this is kind of stabilized maybe in like the 85 to 90 range. And the curveball, meanwhile, has taken this huge, huge jump, says that the way that those are playing off of each other is much, much more effective than it previously was. Um, I will also note, just as a little like throw in for Charlie, because, he has always been a spin the ball, breaking ball kind of guy. Like, he flashed a 110 Stuff Plus on his changeup. The changeup is a more inconsistent pitch for him, but I do think it should go without I do think it should be said, like the changeup this year has spent a lot more time in this negative induced vertical break um, kind of realm, which is phenomenal. It makes it again like difference to the fastball, difference to the fastball, difference to the fastball. Uh, he is creating more and more separation, and he is throwing that changeup harder and harder. He's throwing the changeup 87 miles an hour this year. It was 85 last year, and he's getting more separation from his fastballs than he was previously. It gives the sinker kind of like its own space in a movement profile, which I do think is important. You don't want like five different pitches that all do the same thing. So he is like spreading out what his pitches can do in this like on the arm side part of his arsenal. And yeah, I think there are a lot of good things happening at the start of the year. To also kind of illustrate that with the changeup, at the start of the year, it was about -2 inches of induced vertical break on average. This past month, it was -4.5. So, he's found a way to really get that thing to tumble a little bit. Um, I personally am curious now. I should do some video review and try to figure it out. I'm sure Lance Brosdowski has already gotten it. Um, but yeah, man, I mean this little tweak to Charlie Morton's arm angle has done wonders for him. I think the fastball curveball tunnel is better. I think the changeup is tumbling a little bit more, and you are seeing why the Orioles signed him. Like they clearly thought this dude could be effective still. And he was out there. He kept saying it. He's like, the stuff is there. The stuff is good. I don't know what's going on. Um, and yeah, I mean, sometimes it is the littlest things. Once again, Uh, this arm angle change is about like 21 and a half to about 20 degrees. So, like imperceptible to us. I think if I did not have this page here, and was not curious on it, I never would have known this. I never would have known this. So fascinating that Morton is kind of, you know, making these tweaks mid-season. Kudos to him, continuing to like try to evolve himself and figure these things out and understand, who he is at this point in his career. And kudos to the Orioles for sticking with him. This is clearly like it sucked for the first month. We all know it did, but like you are now getting your value out of him. And frankly, like he is one of the better pitchers on the team. I do think that, the fact that he's up here like running a 28% strikeout rate in the month of June, it's wild. It's kind of like I don't even let me take 1 second and see if I can figure out the last time he ran a 28% strikeout rate. Um, okay. The last time he ran a 28% strikeout rate, he did it three times in his career. Once was his Tampa Bay season, and twice for Atlanta. He never even did it with the Houston Astros when, man, he was like the he was third fiddle to Verlander and Cole, but my God, they won a World Series. He got outs with a broken leg or whatever it was in the postseason in the World Series. Um, Morton is like, oh, I'm sorry, he did it 1 year with the Astros. Okay, so 4 years in his career total. He has run a strikeout rate this high, but none of the last 2 years. It is like this is a little bit of a resurgence, and when we talk about I invite you and implore you to go listen to Tyler's episode, chatting about the trade deadline, and how the Orioles should be looking at this. You got to be really thankful Charlie Morton is starting to look like this version of Charlie Morton. He is walking fewer hitters. He is awesome. He's awesome. While I'm here, before I go, I want to go ahead and just look. I know like um, the the job that he is doing right now is going to be really, really good for K minus walk, and I'm kind of curious where he is on this little leaderboard. Man, I should have looked him up alone first. So, in this past month of June, He is ah, in this past month of June. His K minus walk rate is 21.6%. That if we were going ahead and filtering to just the last month in Major League Baseball, that 21.6% is 20th in Major League Baseball. It is three slots below Jacob deGrom. It is just ahead of Freddie Peralta. Um, yeah, I mean, it's like he is striking dudes out at a very, very high rate, and he is also not walking many of them. The season stats do not tell you what Charlie Morton is doing right now. You have to go look at the last month. This is a different guy fundamentally. Under the hood, some very, very important things have changed. And yeah, I mean, really, like for Dean and Trevor, you have to feel like this is like a solid, three guys to start filling out a rotation. This makes you feel very, very good. Povich has been a little bit inconsistent. Again, I will go and talk about him sometime. And Tomoyuki Sugano is, man, he's kind of becoming the thing we feared he was. I do not want to say that he is without value. He is just what he is the reason that stuff and velocity are important. Trevor Rogers was another example of this last year. You have to have a certain amount of velocity and a certain amount of just oomph to go ahead and beat a hitter. You can no longer just deceive because hitters are too good. They see your stuff over and over on these traject machines. They see all of this stuff. It is simply not enough to be crafty. Um, that said, being crafty can get you a 4.5 ERA and 30 starts, and that is what we are paying Tomoyuki Sugano for. And he could very much still do that, and that's fine. I'm not too worried about it. Um, but like, I do not think he'll be a very effective piece at the trade deadline if we decide to sell. He's going to be with us all year, and at Tomoyuki Sugano Day, I'm a fan of it. I go and watch him. He is a legend of professional baseball. He has done an incredible job throughout his career. He, yeah, I said it before the season. We should appreciate watching somebody who has done as much as he has, and that we will let the results be what they are. So that was a long-winded podcast. I feel good about it though. It's kind of fun because I feel good about Orioles pitching. And my God, I did not feel good about Orioles pitching for so long. Now we just have to get hitters healthy, and it seems like that'll never happen. Westberg's going down. Gary Sanchez hurt his finger now. Adley with the oblique. It was genuinely hilarious to see Jacob Stallings play in a Major League Baseball game for the Baltimore Orioles this year. You cannot make this catcher stuff up. It is literally every time we have someone, they're just gone. It's just gone. It's like that I think South Park meme, and it's gone. The dad's trying to deposit some money in the recession, and he puts it into the bank. He's teaching his kid how to deposit money, and the bank teller just says, and it's gone. Yeah, money's gone. Money's gone. It's gone. So we get a new catcher, and it's gone. Anyway, Jesse just talked about that on the last podcast. Go check him out. That is all I've got today. As always, if you could be so kind, like this podcast, follow this podcast, subscribe to the podcast, comment on the podcast, comment on the YouTube video. Hello, YouTube. Whatever you can do to support. As always, it does go a long way to making us feel loved, and more importantly than our egos, it helps us connect with other fans like yourselves. Helps us, kind of keep this conversation going that we love so much. Do also want to shout out that Tyler had a baby, so he's going to be out for a little while, and Jesse and I will hold it down in the meantime. But that's that. This has been the Warehouse Podcast. The Orioles are good at pitching. Go O's.